Welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving? The world's greatest lean startup podcast. And so here we are back again. Here we are in September. So as usual, we'll kick things off with our usual question, and we will start with Adam. What problem are you solving this week?
All right, I normally go to a customer discovery, but I can't compete with our guest tonight. So here's the problem I'm trying to solve. I want to do a fantasy. This is supply side, not demand side, but I want to do a fantasy football league for startups with a prize. I'm trying to come up with a point system and then see if there's a prize at the end of the season. I don't know. I think it could be interesting for discovering and helping ecosystems sort of pay attention to things that matter and also draw attention to some of the things that don't matter.
So point of clarification, is this like you're trying to pick your favorite startup teams, or is this for a startup who's actually trying to gamify their customer discovery process?
So real startup teams would be included, but yeah, so people like the mentors and the people in the ecosystem that are either just mentoring, aren't investing necessarily. You go to a meetup and there's nothing really for you to do, or you go to a pitch competition, you're in the audience. Those are the people you're getting. That's your intel. I think it could be fun. You're not quite ready to write a check. You're not an angel investor yet. You're doing some mentoring. I think those would be the players in the league. And then, yes, it would be based on real startups that are raising real funding, that are at real pitch competitions, and you get points based on real activity. But this is early stage, so pre $100,000 raised, I think would be, because after that, it's just you can go on, PitchBook or something. But
that's awesome.
Isn't there a company out of Toronto that does something like deconstruct out of Toronto, where they get around and they like people pound on them a little bit? That's what it sounds like. But anyway, sounds like a good idea. Chat GPT, baby. It'll help.
Yeah, right.
I use it for a name. So I think it was like the Unicorn League. They gave me 10 names, and I think we were going with like the Fantasy Unicorn League or something like that.
Ty, how about you? What problem are you solving this week?
Hey, gentlemen, good to be back. Let's see. Right now, I'm working on how to find space for HBCUs to get in the tech transfer commercialization game when they're already behind the 8 ball. And so kind of like what happened in Africa, they didn't try to string copper wire to build out the telecom system. They actually went to cell towers. So they leaped the business model. So we're trying to figure out how to leap the business model. And so I'll be literally running from Baltimore to DC, back to Baltimore, out to Cleveland, back home, and then off to Philadelphia, having all these conversations around AI and blah, 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 blah. So that's what I'm working on. A lot of stuff.
I love it. Very cool. Yeah. Well, good luck and happy driving. And for a special guest, Bob, what problem are you solving this week?
So what I'll say is I'm solving multiple problems, but the only one I can really talk about is the one I'm working on my house. So I've lived in my house since 1999. I used it to raise 4 children, and now the majority of people will want to basically downsize to something smaller. But I've decided that my wife and I've decided that we want to stay where we're at. So we're in the midst of redesigning the entire house for the next 20 years. And so for example, we're putting in an elevator, believe it or not. We're actually designing it for grandkids. Like, where do the grandkids go? And we're actually in the midst of designing an office for my children to come work at, so they can drop their grandkids off to see us. So it's all this stuff about interviewing people and trying to understand what's it like. I'm turning 60 this year, and it's like, what's it like to be 70 and 80 years old, which I've seen, but I've never really thought about hard. And now all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I have to put grab bars up for the bathroom, but hey, I can put up some really cool grab bars. So I'm having lots of fun just kind of thinking through kind of the next 20 years of my life.
It's pretty impressive, Bob. It really is. As somebody who is just 3 years behind you and thinking about what that next transition, because right now I'm in the middle of parenting the parents. Right. So
yeah. So we take care of my in-laws. Both my parents are gone. But one of the things that's interesting is we all assumed we were going to sell the house and retire and go somewhere. And we kind of prototyped it out, and we realized, like, we like where we live. We have all our friends are here. Like, this one thing, like we can move to Salt Lake City, but then I got to meet a whole bunch of new people. Like, I don't really want to do that. Like, I'd much rather go visit Salt Lake, and then like they can come visit us. And so that's what we're trying to do, is make it this really interesting place where all of my friends have built houses or done something where they're somewhere else, but they all want to come back, but they sold their house, so they can come back, stay with us, and then we can go back and stay with them. It's a win-win in both sense.
I love it.
That's it. Hey, John, how about you, man? What problem are you solving?
Yeah.
How about me? Let's see. So aside from being a recovering engineer, Ty's also called me part-time philosopher, and so I don't know. The lately it's been a spiritual philosophical reset as well. So I've talked about kids back to school and new routines and new extracurricular activities, and so now that we've got a couple weeks of the fall semester under our belt, now it's time to go back to me and say, well, what do I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? So that's the problem I've been trying to solve is John. So that's enough.
I'm not
Awesome.
sure you ever answered the question. You never
I
answer
know.
that question. What do you do when you grow up? Because you don't really ever grow up. I still feel like I'm a kid, and I'm 60. So
Yeah, exactly. It's just different sprints, right? It's different iterations.
exactly, it's just different sprints. That's the best way to think of it. I really like that.
So Bob, I love having you on here.
Thanks for inviting
you
me.
being one of the co-creators of this Job to Be Done framework. And so just to start broad, like if you were to explain it to, my 90-year-old grandmother in simple terms.
Or your 13-year-old. It's easier to do it
yes.
to your 13-year-old. Your 90-year-old
Exactly.
grandma is kind of a little too hard. But that's
All right,
I
so
can try.
we'll go to my early teenager, yes.
But here's the basic premise: is that I'm an engineer as well, and I would say a recovering engineer, and that I was told a lie when I was going to school. I felt like they pre-programmed us to be arrogant. Like, you're the smartest people ever. You know what you're talking about. You know how to do all this
100%.
hard math. And oh, by the way, if you just build something, they will come. And that just, in my world, that just didn't happen. And so what it meant is that I had to build product for other people. And I realized if I went and talked to people about what they wanted, they would always tell me yes, but then I would build it and bring it back to them, and then they'd tell me no. And so I had to figure out a new way of basically talking to
How dare they?
customers. Yeah. Well, no, they don't know. They don't lie on purpose. They just don't know. They actually know more about what they don't want than what they do want.
Yeah.
And so I built a methodology that basically is called Jobs to Be Done. And the premise is this: if people don't buy products, they hire products to fit into their life to make progress. And so if you think about it, it's about taking 3 or 4 steps back from like, why did you buy a new CRM? What were you hoping a new CRM was going to do for you? So instead of asking you about your CRM, it's like, what was going on that said you needed a new CRM? And what were you hoping for? Like when you bought it, like what were you going to be able to do that you couldn't do today? And it's when you take that step back, you actually frame the job that people are hiring the product for, which then allows me to actually have great design latitude to create things that are very, very different than what I initially thought. And so it's a way for me to actually learn about the consumer and what they want, and then be able to figure out how to design and build it to fit into their lives. And I've been doing that for almost 40 years. The way I would describe it is I've been studying what causes people to change behavior in their lives. And it's ultimately, there's got to be some context and some struggling moment in their life that basically creates the void. And then there's got to be some progress that they're hoping for, that then they're willing to take and make a decision to pull something new into their lives. And I built a methodology around it. I collaborated with a gentleman by the name of Clay Christensen out of the Harvard Business School on it. And I have a firm by it, and I also teach at Northwestern, and I teach Jobs to Be Done and how to do consumer research and basically customer research.
Oh my God, this is going to be fun.
And it's one of 25 different methods that I have. So the way to really start the conversation here is that I have 4 mentors, and my mentors literally took so I'm dyslexic. I've had 3 close-head brain injuries before I was 7 years old. I can't read and write. And so when I graduated from high school, I was told to be a baggage handler at the airport or a construction worker. And my mom refused to accept that, and I guess so did I. But like my mom really kind of made sure I didn't forget that. And ultimately, I learned from Dr. W. Edwards Deming, Clayton Christensen, Genichi Taguchi, and Dr. Willie Moore. Those 4 basically poured all their knowledge into me, and it's enabled me to work on over 3,500 different products and services. I've worked on things like Intuit and Quicken and Basecamp, and you pretty much name it, I've worked on it. And it's just one of those fun things that I would never have planned my life out this way, but it's just been so much fun to build all these different things.
I know ties down. You gave Ty a great opportunity to talk about behavioral economics when you were talking about change. So I'll let him get there. I'm going to ask a very quick tactical question. Who's it for? So is it?
What do you mean by who's it for?
So is this for?
Oh, yeah. So what's so interesting is over time. Yeah. Oh, so it started out initially for product. It started out for engineers because we were so overly arrogant and literally so stupid about consumers that we had to figure out a way to talk to consumers. And everybody's like, no. You're an engineer. You can't talk to consumers. I'm like, yes, we can. And so eventually it started out that way. But to be honest, I spend a quarter of my time with marketers and with salespeople. And like the research itself is so fundamental. And it's like, I don't need a big sample. You need 10, 12 interviews, and you can literally see how the whole thing works because it's based on causation, not on correlation or based on what just people say. And so it's got some rigor to it, but at the same time, it's literally very fundamental research that will go a long way with it throughout the organization.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because as a recovering engineer, I used to do requirements engineering, and it was very much feature based, right? Yeah. And they drilled that into our school. Is like, it's just you need to make sure that you either get the perfect requirement or that you add more features, right? Which is again the antithesis of how it's actually done to make something that people value.
By the way, this is the exact same way we hire people. We literally make up a job description, make a list of stuff that they should do, and then we
shove the resume into it.
Yeah, and shove the resume into it and make it work. And so I have a new book coming out called Jobs Move that is literally going like, why do we treat, basically, job descriptions like the 1980s? This is ridiculous.
Thank you.
So one of the thoughts that I had around this idea of interviews, right? Steve and everybody like, let's do 100. And you get out there, this becomes this benchmark of interviewing. We've had Ash Muir on here, and he's like, well,
Ash is a great good friend. Yeah,
we have to figure out exactly the right. But John and I would look at the Norman Nielsen, right? So Norman Nielsen would say there is a math equation that says if you ask that one particular thing, that you're really trying to understand that particular feature, anything past 5, you get 4 out of 5. Anything past that, there's a zero return on it. So I really like.
Yep. And so the thing is what I say though is that the way that I was taught research is I was taught the scientific method of research, which is form a hypothesis and then go collect data around the hypotheses. And let me tell you, it's wrong. It's wrong. Let me tell you why it's wrong. Because at some point when you're a dyslexic, illiterate kid and you don't know how to actually form my hypotheses, how do I form a hypothesis when I'm not smart enough? So what I did is I formed Jobs to be Done as what I call hypothesis building research. I'm going to go ask a bunch of questions. But I'm going to do it in a way that I can actually basically see and weave the causation together, because the only thing that's constant here is the causation.
Say more about the causation, please. Say more about what do you mean?
So the causation is like, so for example, I'm interviewing somebody and they say, oh my God, you know what? I ended up trusting the salesperson. I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. What do you mean you trusted the salesperson? There's no way and it's like, well, let me tell you what happened. And so they start to walk through how the salesperson built trust, which was first is when they showed up, they didn't actually tell me about who they worked for and what they were and how many people they worked for. They asked me about my company. And then what happens is they came back with 3 really different alternatives and educated me about what my alternatives would be. And then eventually, they were responsive, but not too responsive. And then the last thing is you know what? They basically told me, I asked for something I knew they couldn't do. And the moment they told me no, I knew I could trust them. And so all of a sudden, we literally found out that 1 is don't go in and talk about your business. Don't talk about your business, talk about their business. 2 is make sure you're responsive. 3 is give them 3 alternatives so they can learn. And 4 is tell them no. 28% increase in sales.
Wow. Holy smokes.
And so part of this is basically, to your point, Ty, is I don't need a lot of interviews, but what happens is once you see the causation is universal.
So what it tells me is that the soft skills are
Yes,
as important to developing this causal
that's right.
relationship and hypothesis
But
building
the
than the actual intelligence that you
but
collect.
the soft skill is about unpacking the language to what they
Right.
really mean, because
Right.
at some point somebody goes like, "Oh, I want it to be easy." You're like, "Okay, what does that mean?" And like, "I don't know, just easy." And then you say, "Well, tell me what hard is." "Oh, hard. Too many steps." I mean, they can be so specific that all of a sudden you just flip it into the negative realm and they can talk about it. And so part of it is learning the skills to interrogate. Because again, I think about it as criminal and intelligence interrogation. They don't even look, most consumers don't even connect the dots of how they bought a new car. They literally go like, "Oh my God, I bought a new car because I got a deal on it." That had nothing to do with why they bought a car.
Right. Right.
And
Oh,
so
yeah.
part of this is stepping back and seeing that kind of understanding. And so I've had to self-teach myself, I self-taught about how to interrogate, but I had some people who literally taught me in the late 80s, some very basic questioning techniques that enabled me to actually just go really far with this and to realize that consumers were lying to themselves.
So how do you teach that? I've had 30 years of this work.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I pulled it off my shelf. It's a book called Listening
There you
Deeply,
go. That's
right?
it.
And it literally is about an approach to understanding and consulting to organizational culture, and learning
Yes.
how to listen deeply is a very it is full of humility and
Yes.
selflessness, because now you
Yes.
have to empty yourself of your ego to be able to hear what other people are saying. How do you teach people
Yeah.
in your students to go, shut the F up and stop the noise in your head?
Yep. So there's a couple things I do. The first thing is we talk about the voice in their head.
Mm.
And we ask them, what's the voice in your head saying? And by the way, if your voice in your head is speaking, who's listening? Right? So you start to realize there's this voice that's there all the time. And the reality is you have to learn to get it to shut up.
Yep.
To listen.
Yep.
And so part of it is there's a little technique I talk about where you take that voice and you tell them to go sit on a log by the river and meditate. Just shut up and don't say anything to me. And if I hear that voice talking to me, I literally go, shut up. Because that if you don't turn it off, you can't really hear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is to realize that most people don't connect. Like if I talk about why you bought a car, you're going to tell me about the moment where you signed the papers. But the reality is the things that led up to get to it might be 7 months prior. You know, you got a repair bill and then
Just
you
bought a
heard a
car in the
sound
past
and then
2
you heard
months,
this
so yeah.
and then you heard that. And so ultimately you have to actually learn how to actually understand the full story of somebody's understanding of why they did something. Nobody randomly changes. Nobody randomly does anything. Right. So to be honest, Deming used to say this all the time, is randomness is actually a lazy man's approach to describing causality. If it's random, that means I just have to wait for it. It'll just happen. Look, nothing just happens. Everything's caused. And so we need to understand that. And so that's the fervor by which you go after, like, what caused you to buy a new CRM? Because if you're the CRM company, you're thinking, it's these features. Oh my God, it's these things. Features and benefits have no place to describe why people buy anything. It's the outcomes and the context that actually help us describe why they bought something. And so if we ask them the right questions around the right topics, we get the answers that help us how to figure out how to develop the next product. But if we ask them about the feature, all we do is we just copy the feature. When the reality is what does that feature enable you to do that you couldn't do today or you couldn't do yesterday? And that question is a great question. So I teach them by actually trying to, so the best way to describe it is I teach them to be the understudy of the customer. And that they have to live in the shoes and they have to feel what they feel, hear what they hear, see what they see. And then ultimately your job is to represent the customer at the product table.
So
that's how I
lovely.
So
guys, go ahead. I got a whole lot of ideas. Go ahead, but
no, Ty, I'm talking to you specifically. I want you to jump in, please.
Well, what's interesting is John and I would talk about, I love this idea of outcomes. One of the things as an engineer, John would say, we need to differentiate between outcomes and outputs, right? And
yes.
I think outputs are feature driven, right?
For
Like,
sure.
that's
And
outputs.
very big
I built
difference
this, I
because
built this, I built this.
the outputs are the specs we had to go gather, but the outcomes are the things the consumer had to do with the product once I gave them the
Yes.
outputs.
Yes.
Bingo. And because of the work that where John and I worked, we worked at one of the intelligence agencies. They were very good at a whole lot of features and a whole lot of data. But what we tried to get them to start to thinking about, and you write about this, is the context. That context was the king. In intelligence, context is the only thing that matters, because everybody has content. Everybody has content.
That's
It's
right.
like what you do with it.
Context. So here's the thing: is I always say context creates value, and
Yep.
contrast creates meaning. And so I can't learn if I don't actually have different things. So that's the foundation of how I develop everything. Is I need context and I need contrast. So I don't build one prototype. I build a set of prototypes because I'm going to learn a shitload from them.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So we'd always say, okay, I built this. And Ty and I would always answer, to do what? What are you trying to accomplish?
For whom? When and where?
For whom? When and where? Exactly.
So to me, the market is defined by who, when, where, and why. There's not, and that determines what, how, and how much. And so when people will say, "Oh, here's a persona," I'm like, "Okay, that's perfect." But where and when and why are they going to use it?
Exactly.
And what happens is the personas are described on current behavior. So all we know is that they love pasta on Tuesday nights. That doesn't tell me anything of why they're going to buy a CRM. We're talking about how people change behavior, which is a very different set of data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm getting a little too. That's a
No. I love it. But one of the things John taught me in terms of customer and consumer, because I think that you're getting to this
the
customer
two very different.
Absolutely. John, as the father of a 13-year-old, and the cell phone, and we try to get our engineers that we worked with to start to think about the differentiate between, as the father of a 13-year-old, who's the customer and who's the consumer. And I think
That's
your
right.
idea of context and contrast is a great way to figure out, oh, I'm not selling this phone to a dad. I'm selling this to the girl that the dad has to buy.
Every B2B organization has the same problem. The buyer and the user are completely separate. And so you have to actually understand the progress the buyer's trying to make, which is help me get more productivity, help me reduce the cost, help me do, versus the user, which is help me track more sales, help me understand where my leads are. And so you start to realize that my mistake is I thought it was one or the other, and the reality is it's both. You need to actually understand the progress that the buyer wants to make and the progress that the user wants to make, and make sure you've got enough left over to satisfy both. Because if you don't satisfy both, you will satisfy neither.
How do you put this in terms of strategy? So I am a big fan of the blue ocean strategy. I think it's a great way to think about that. Something got to go in order for me to grow another opportunity. And the reason why I like it, it allowed the organization, a government organization. I mean, and I believe it was the first time it had been demonstrated in a government organization that you don't have to do everything. As a matter of fact, if you want to be able to provide more value, there's some things that you can just either just stop or reduce to such levels that it's always in the background. It's creating some noise. If they want it, cool. But you've created an opportunity. Demand side is so high. They're like, yeah, I'm not spending my money on that thing anymore because it's stupid anyway. Because now you've given me something that I really, really didn't know I wanted until you offered it in a way that was like, oh, you can do that.
By the way, consumers don't know what's possible. Like this is where it's very funny. We think that they know we think they know what they want, and the reality is like they don't really know what they want. They know the outcome they want. They don't know the product they want. They don't know how to, because ultimately this is all about trade-offs. There is never a perfect product. This is why I hate the concept of an ideal product experience. It's just bullshit.
That's why we named this this episode, all I wanted was a hole, right? It's the famous line of I'm not trying to buy a drill. I'm just trying to get a 1/4-inch hole in my wall so I can.
But if I ask that 5 times, why do you want a drill? I want a hole. Why do I want a hole? I want a plug. Why do I want a plug? I want a lamp. Why do I want a lamp? I want to read better. Perfect. I'm going to go work on the Kindle. Like this is where we keep thinking we're competing in this realm of drills and whatever, and we move out. And when you take 5 steps back, you realize like, how does a drill compete with a Kindle? You start to realize they do, and this is where like this is. So to me, the most interesting thing is, so I worked on Snickers, right? And you'd think do you think Snickers competes with Milky Way or doesn't?
They're both candy bars, right? They just
It got chocolate
So-
nougat.
same
That's
kind, same
chocolate,
kind of
but
ingredients.
here's the thing: is from the supply side, they absolutely compete. So supply side meaning basically how do we make it? They're made on the same line. They actually have the same underlying cost structure. They actually have similar ingredients. But when you actually go to the demand side and ask people, tell me about the last time you had a Snickers bar, it turns out they never thought of a Milky Way. They thought of a sandwich and a coffee and a Red Bull and a Snickers, but they didn't think of a Milky Way. And when you thought of a Milky Way, it was an ice cream and a run and a glass of wine. And you start to realize, like, though they're actually very similar in the categories, they actually don't compete at all. And the moment we could figure that out, we basically took Snickers and positioned it against, in this case, you're not you when you're hungry. By the way, they told us that. We didn't make that up, right?
Wow.
And you found it from interviews, and it went from 600 million to 3 billion.
Say that again. 600 million to 3 billion.
Billion, yeah. And to be honest, it was one of those things where you just had to listen. If you listened, you could hear it all. It was all right there.
Shut up and meditate.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Stop talking. Who said that? Stop talking. Wow. That's pretty amazing.
So this
Because
is where
it's funny as you were saying it, the songs were playing, the music was playing in my head. It really was. It's funny.
Yeah.
Snickers satisfies
That's-
you. You
right.
angry,
But
ain't
the whole
you?
notion is
You're not yourself.
You're not you when you're hungry. That's all them, right? The Betty White commercial was a classic.
Pesci, I like the Pesci one better.
Yeah,
but,
the Joe
you know,
Pesci one. I like
That's
the Robin
funny.
Williams one where he's the head coach. That's really good too.
That was a good one.
But anyway,
All right, so that was, I admit, that was one of the questions I was dying to ask. So it goes back to my other question, not just who it's for, but when is it for? So
yes.
if you have a product and you're stalled or you're looking for new markets or new growth,
Yep.
obviously those numbers are hard in the process, and we're 100% bought in. But on the other hand, if you're Snickers and you have an idea for a candy bar,
Yes.
and you're thinking that way, it's not better or worse, but it definitely changes your mentality. We talked about this while you were joining. You might end up as a, what are those bars my kids have, as a Cliff Bar or
A
something.
Cliff Bar, whatever. They're all.
what
do you call it? It's like the Kind Bar. The Kind Bar is owned by the way, Mars bought Kind Bar as basically a defense mechanism against the same category.
Protection. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
you don't want to say.
Here's a question that popped up before we get off topic. Does it also mean that people make a decision about their favorite candy bar early in their lives?
So what happens is think of it as a brand. A brand becomes the placeholder for a moment in time. And so you say, like, boy, I'm hungry. And then you go, oh, do I want a Snickers or not? You know the experience. But ultimately, the first Snickers is the thing that actually does or doesn't do the job that then creates the brand. So the brand is an effect, not a cause.
So it still has to satisfy the cause.
It still has to satisfy the cause, because if it doesn't satisfy the cause, then the reality is, like, it doesn't matter. And so what happens is most of the time the brand is just a shorthand, and marketers have been brainwashed to think that the brand is the reason why people buy, and it's not. It's the product experience that literally becomes the shorthand of why people buy.
All right, thanks for going down that path with me, Adam. Go ahead. What's the next tactical thing you want to get to?
No, you guys keep going. So how long? What do we have you till? 15, 30? What do we got you for?
You got another? Okay. Yeah, we got another 15 to 30 minutes. I'm good. I have to get up early tomorrow, but I'm good.
You already got your blood moving, man. Let's keep going.
Yeah,
go ahead, Adam.
All right, so I'm curious about this.
Go ahead, Adam. If you don't say anything, I am. Well, the only thing I was going to say, Bob, is that what you've then proven is what I've heard Clay describe as social, functional, and emotional. Right?
Yes.
That if it doesn't satisfy the functional, it hits in my stomach, boom, it's down there, I'm good to go. That the social and functional association that I have with a Snickers or Milky Way or Three Musketeers or whatever it might be doesn't matter, because functionally it's all the same. It's all chocolate and sweet.
But here's the thing: is socially, the reality is, like, for example, Snickers, people will eat it anywhere. They don't care about other people. Milky Way is almost exclusively eaten alone.
Oh, wow.
Because it's very emotional. It's typically an emotional experience. Something emotionally happened before, good or bad. You need time to regroup. you're using this to actually basically either feel pleasure because you want the taste of it, or you need isolating time to basically recoup whatever happened. And so what happens is you start to, if you ask people the last time they ate a full Milky Way, it is the craziest story you've ever heard in your life.
That's amazing.
They're mostly hidden. Most people hide full Milky Ways because they don't want anybody else to know where they are.
Yeah, I'm going to check my kids' Halloween candy and see if there's anything left. Yeah, that's all.
If you no, I won't say it. I remember we're recording. My wife will see this at some point, so I won't say anything more. But like there's stuff hidden throughout the house for when you have that emotional experience. Like I have a scotch, she has a chocolate. It's how it works.
All right.
Those are good. Adam, you were going to say something. Go ahead, man.
All right,
I'm
I
gonna
was
stop
going to
talking.
say something. So all right, so Lenny had 400,000, or maybe it's up to 1 million right now. He added 3 new subscribers, so we can do a little research. So you were talking about your version is the practical side, and Clay's was the theoretical side.
Clay. So Clay, when Clay was in the hospital, he basically said, I want to turn jobs into a theory. And at the time, what I would tell you is jobs was a method for me. It was my hack for being able to figure out how the product market fit happened. And so I've been talking to Clay about it since 93, 94. And eventually, when he got sick, he basically told me he couldn't die when this is in 2009. He had a heart attack, a stroke, and cancer all in the same year. And he goes like, I need to turn this into a theory. I'm like, whatever we got to do, you got it. And so he basically not only talked to all my clients, he talked to other people. It boiled it down into a theory. And then from there, I've been actually now applying it to all these crazy places along the way, but it's been primarily a product tool.
All right. So to give Clay, what I want to get back to the practical side, but where should we? Is there a paper that came out of that, or is it on his? Is it one of his
so there was
last
one
books?
of the first one of the first articles he wrote was Marketing Malpractice with Taddy Hall and Scott Cook, and that was some of the original work. That was like 2000, but we did the original milkshake work back in 94, 95. So that's kind of where this all started, was back in those days where we were applying it in different places, but the most popular one was the milkshake.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite videos of all time. There was like some regular version, and then there was like the good version of him with that background.
That was University of Phoenix,
fancy campus, and then it was like never hire a donut for hire a donut.
Yeah, that's right. I always never hire it. It's messy, and
that's I would never hire it. Like he's so
we could almost quote it verbatim.
Yeah, I can do it. I don't want to lose time. All right, so switching back to the practical side, you talked about context, struggle moments, figuring out the causality. Talked about how hypothesis is not the way to start. So how does it?
I tend not to start with hypotheses because at some point I then have confirmation bias. It's kind of like I have no idea why people switch banks. Like I have no idea why you left this bank to go to that bank. Let me just hear the stories. I hear 10 of them. You can see the patterns. That's the power of being a dyslexic, is that we are inherently better pattern recognizers than everybody else. But since then, I've actually built an algorithm that allows us to actually see the patterns.
So this is amazing stuff on the analysis side. How do you start? Like, how do you know who to look for? You have this.
So the first thing is very good question. So let me just make sure I got the question right. How do you know who to talk to, right? So first of all, we only talk to people who have recently switched. We don't talk to people who want to switch. I built homes. I didn't talk to people who wanted to build a home. I talked to people who bought a home, because in the middle of that, you actually learn all the trade-offs they were willing to make, where the people wanting to buy the home, I literally had 98% of them tell me they wanted an Energy Star compliant house, which turned out to be $38,000 to make it Energy Star compliant. Turns out I sold 0 of them.
Wow.
And the reality is everybody turned in for an energy compliant house, you had to stay in the house for 22 years to make it worthwhile. If you actually bought the finished basement for $38,000, you could actually sell it for the extra $38,000. So almost everybody bought. Yeah. So it's like the difference is I don't talk to people who want to buy. I talk to people who bought, because they actually end up telling me about all the trade-offs they had to make in order to make this progress, what they had to give up, what they had to get, what they were hoping to get, what they didn't get, what they did get, all of that. So the first thing is I just need to talk to 10 customers of your product. Now, if you don't have a product yet, which I know Ty is thinking about, like going, hey man, I got something that doesn't exist yet. What you do is you then go interview people who are like, when your product comes out, what are people going to fire when they use your product? If we go interview those people, we'll learn everything we need to do.
So the users of your competitor.
User of them competitors. So like, for example, I worked with Facebook a long time ago, and the way we created Facebook marketplaces, we went and talked to people who had opened an eBay account, opened an Etsy account, opened a Craigslist account, people who shopped on Craigslist, people who shopped on Etsy, people who shopped on, all the different, and then from there, we actually learned everything we needed to do to go create Facebook Marketplace, which is about $6.5 billion in transactions right now.
Wow.
And it's just understanding the struggling moments of why did you do this and why now? And it's not random. If we assume it's random, see, the problem I have these days is people think everything is about statistics. And the reality is like what Clay and I would talk about is the N of one. I need to explain why one person decided to say, today's the day I want to sell something on Facebook. If I can figure out one person, and I can figure out the next person, and then when I have the third person, I can start to see the patterns in it. But the reality is we start with an N of one, not an N of 100, because what happens when we have an N of 100, we try to actually mash everything together as opposed to treating them as isolated, very specific things. So there's a great book that I would highly recommend. I listen to it every single year for the last 10 years. It's called The End of Average. If you've never heard of it, it's by a great man by the name of, Todd Rose.
Todd Rose, yep.
He is amazing. Mm-hmm. He is amazing. And what he talks about is how the notion of the average has literally, I'll do the PG version, screwed us all. And we use the average as a meaningful metric when the reality is 90% of the time, the average is meaningless, not meaningful.
I'm going to have to think about that
one. Ty. I feel like I'm just destroying Ty with everything.
I could see him melt. I could see his skull physically fracture.
Not melting. What I am doing, Bob, is trying to think of how to take this, because I know one of the things that Clay was working on before he passed was this whole idea of education. Like, how do you take this idea, the job to be done of education, so you can find a way to think about the consumers of not the customer, the consumers of the educational process. Yeah. And knowing that I am serving universities that have traditionally not been a part of a larger educational enterprise at the big level, to leap that standard wave you get there, what does that look like? And
have you seen Choosing College? Did you see the book Choosing College?
Truth in College?
No, Choosing College. I wrote a book after the work I did with SNHU. Do you know who SNHU is?
I do.
And so I've worked with Paul LeBlanc for 15 years. And ultimately he just retired. He is the largest university in the world. He has 228,000 students at his school. And it's all because we understood the jobs of what people were trying to do. So think of it this way. How many people want to go back to school but can't? That's the fundamental premise that we actually looked at in 2010. And we realized it wasn't 1,000 people, it wasn't 10,000 people, but it was millions of people want to go back to school but can't. So how do we just make ourselves, so what I would say is he basically came back and said, how do we actually end up serving these people? We don't have to be as good as Harvard. We just have to be better than nothing.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's how, and so like, and I have friends who are like nurses and they're like, yeah, I looked at Michigan State and Eastern Michigan, and I decided to go with SNHU. Like literally they're in Michigan and they're still hiring SNHU because it's the easiest, fastest, most well-regarded system because they've literally thought through every aspect of online education. It's amazing.
Wow.
So I really
how
like
do you,
this idea of hiring this education. I really do. I'm sorry, Adam.
That's
Please
right.
go.
Well, students hire. This is the
Yeah,
thing is
absolutely.
the hard part is that the academics think they're in charge, but the reality is they're not actually serving the customers, and they're not serving them well enough, because at some point in time, how many people are walking away with like a grade school teacher walking away with $100,000 worth of debt is literally like putting them in servitude for the next 30 years of their life.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is ridiculous.
Yeah. Adams, I'm sorry, please.
well,
Sorry.
no, I'm sorry. I'm trying to tell the guy to go sit on the log so I can listen, so I can remember my next question, but I can also
Sorry. I'll come
listen
back if that helps.
listen to you guys. So I'm trying my best, but I admit it.
Uh,
To sort of draw attention here, but how do you reconcile the sort of secondary research? Ty mentioned this idea of strategy. So you have this huge number of people where that justifies the existence or the opportunity or they want to go back to college and they can't.
Yes.
Which then leads to this smaller question of let's go talk, let's go observe or talk to, which is
Let's
another
go figure.
question I have.
Let's go figure out how
go,
people decide today's the day I need to go back to school.
So then that's where causation, and that's the struggle you want to learn about.
That's right.
How do you make the leap to even? That's kind of the thing I keep harping back on, like the Genesis story. Like, well, who says that college is the right thing? Who says that more general problem? Okay. Well.
So the very most fundamental phenomenon that literally drives every set of innovation. Think of an innovation as when I need to change, because we are creatures of habit, and we would decide to do the same thing over and over again, unless it wasn't for that voice in our head and the notion that we can do better. And the moment that we decide to do better is the moment we do something. So I call that a struggling moment, because sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it's not. But there's a point where I struggle and I decide I have to do something about this. And if there is no struggling moment, we can't ever see the opportunity to make the progress. So most people are trying to make everybody struggle less. And I'm trying to say the more we struggle, the healthier we are as a society, because it forces us to make decisions.
Cocoon,
we had a whole podcast around friction, and I wanted to ask you this question around the purpose of friction. If I didn't have friction, my ass would slip right off the chair, right? We know that.
That's right.
And so most times we think that we're hiring products to lessen our friction, but we had a conversation. It was like, but maybe you don't want to get rid of friction all the time. Yeah. It actually creates an opportunity with the friction.
So I've had many conversations with tech people around friction. And what I'll tell you is that when you make it too easy, it's too good to be true. It's just a fact. And so part of it is you have to know when to create the right struggling moments at the right time.
Yes.
Because think of them as speed bumps. The moment they go over the speed bump, it's like, I ain't going back. Right? So you want to figure out the right amount of energy to get them invested in that progress, but at the same time to feel like they're doing something that's meaningful, as opposed to 9 times out of 10, we're getting people to do a bunch of stuff that's meaningless. And we think that that's progress.
Is that what you describe as a push-pull forces?
That's correct. Push forces are the reasons why you need to change. And the pull forces are the forces that basically you're hoping to have now that you have this new thing in your life. So what you're able to do that you can't do today.
I saw a video today at some point of a Buddhist monk who was talking about push and pull. And so he had this pendulum. He said, you had to think about the opposite, because then you could create balance. So you don't push away the things that you want to, and you don't pull the things that you want, that you're trying to find some balance between the two, so you can make, in case of a Buddhist, some life shift. Right.
That's right. But this is where we talk about there's fuel. Push and pull are fuel for the change. Anxiety and habit are the friction to the change. And what happens is most of the time people can articulate the fuel, but they don't think about the friction. And the thing is, they go together. And so in some cases, for example, I built homes here in Detroit. And one of the things I did is I realized that I built homes for, think of your parents, downsizers, right? The number one frictional point of them was I have 3,000 square feet of stuff to put in 1,500 square feet. And so what I did is I raised the price of the condo and included moving and storage and a place to sort all your crap when the kids come to visit. I got a 28% lift in sales. Not because I added as a feature, it's because I reduced the friction. Most of the time people tell me at business school, they say, just add more features and people will buy it. Well, more features actually creates anxiety.
Yeah, I think
Can it
wasn't
really
that
do all those
wasn't
things
another story in when competing against Luck about that for apartment sizes
Yep.
that they actually started adding a kitchen table, even though
So
it
that
looked
was me. One of the things they basically told me in the very beginning is I don't want to host the holidays anymore. I don't want the kitchen table. But what we found is that people basically, if they didn't know where the kitchen table was going to go, they weren't going to move because it's the emotional bank account of their life. And so I actually
It's a
had to
habit.
take the second bedroom, cut it down and make it smaller and do the opposite of what they told me, which was a place to put the dining room table. But it was so small that they could never host there. Right?
I think that there's and I would love to have this another conversation around
Please.
this idea of behavioral economics. You know, the whole idea of nudge, that you're architecting through the
Yes.
discovery process exactly how you want people to engage with your product, right? And so through these processes of discoveries.
Well, but here's the thing is you really can't, you can set it up, but they have to consume.
Yes.
And so part of it is really being able to understand this gets back to your point about listening. You have to listen for the reality of the story, not the embellishments that they're adding on top of it.
Yes.
So there's what I call 3 layers of language. There's a pablum layer of language where they just like, how was your day? Oh, it was good. Like I can tell you by how my wife says good, whether it was a good day or not. There's nothing to do with whether it was a good day or
how are
not.
you, honey? I'm fine.
Right?
I'm fine.
The second part of the question though is then, so, you know, what was great about your day or what was worse? And this is where people exaggerate. I call it the fantasy level, where they make it more like a nightmare or they make it like a fantasy. And it's just so big that it's not real either. And so eventually you got to say, all right, like what really happened? And the moment you start to get down to what happened and how they felt, now you have the dominoes of exactly how people behave. And so what happens is we think that people are telling us the truth, but they're not. They're actually exaggerating, or they're conflating, or or to be honest, another form of lying is just not to tell you the data they already know. And so you have to really, so the recommendation is to read Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, because you'll learn to be a criminal and intelligence interrogator to really know whether people are lying or not, and and it's not lying like they're trying to cheat.
No, of course.
They're lying because they don't actually know.
Or as Chris Rock says, you never date anyone, you date their representative.
I love that.
All right,
God,
let's do
the Chris Rock reference.
let's do one more tactical question from Adam, and then we'll start wrapping up.
Good.
Oh wow, you're calling on me because it's set me up perfectly. So in that sense of getting the truth, how do you determine? You talked about design thinking. You talked about whether it's customer immersion, or how do you decide if you're going to use an observation? You're just going to go to the milkshake store and watch customers.
Good question.
Talk to them versus.
So I always do so the thing is the research I'm talking about is fast and it's small. So it's like if anything, it's 10 interviews, which takes me 2 or 3 days. I can do the analysis in 2 or 3 days. Like these are very fast iterations. That's the other part is, as an engineer, I needed really fast feedback. And most of the research projects I'd go ask for, they'd get bigger and bigger and longer, and they'd ask way too many questions, and it wouldn't get where I was at. And so, to me, one of the things is to do these fast, and ultimately, I might have to do multiple rounds of it, and I'd rather do 2 rounds of 10 interviews than 20 interviews of the same thing, because I learned way more. Right?
It's a very Deming concept. Yes.
Yeah.
Small batch sizes.
Small, fast. Mm-hmm. But I think in the end, it's really about being able to see those patterns and to realize that it's not about mashing it up and build. So think of it this way: is people like thick crust pizza, people like thin crust pizza. But when I worked on DiGiorno, we put it all together and we made medium thick crust pizza. Nobody bought it. And we have to realize that clustering is a way better method than averaging. And so I would highly suggest that people start to look into clustering methods, because there's not one answer. There's usually multiple answers, and clustering is the way to find the multiple answers.
That's a great way to end. Ty, final thoughts?
So I'm going to go with the last, clustering. And Bob, I started undergrad as a chemistry major. Didn't last
Yes.
because I had a horrible math teacher. She was basically doing alchemy. I didn't know what she was doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
what I did learn about calculus speaks to small batch sizes. If you're trying to find the area under the curve, you can't go like this left and right and expect to understand all of this. You need
That's
to slice it up and get smaller and smaller slices. And as you get smaller and smaller slices, you get more and more accurate information about what
That's
you're
right.
trying to understand.
That's
And
exactly
so
right.
that's what I'm leaving with small batch sizes. It is calculus. It
It is calculus.
finding the area under the curve and making
Yep.
it smaller and smaller to understand what's really going on.
That's right. And it's a simple version of calculus because it's just taking slices and asking questions and just adding the questions up. So it's not harder than calculus. It's just applying calculus thinking to very, very linear kind of interviewing.
And it better be, because I don't understand math anymore.
That's right,
I ain't a
yeah.
mathematician,
So
baby.
I have to write math equations to my kids, so I'm still pretty good at it.
I love it. Adam, final thoughts.
All right, you can give me the short answer as a teaser for next time. But you started off with build it and they will come, and the greatest lie ever told. Like, where did that lie come from? Why is it so hard to get people to solve these problems from a demand side instead of?
So think of it this way: is every time I come up with an idea and then I think it's going to solve a problem, I have to then go find a bunch of people who have that problem, which makes it I got to go find of the 8 billion people in the world who has this problem. But if I actually study a group of people who have a problem and then figure out what to go build for them, it's actually 10 times easier, right? So I don't have to build the best accounting package in the world. I have to build the best accounting packages for small businesses, which is actually just simple. It doesn't have to be thorough. It has to be simple.
Right.
And it's a case where most people would say, there isn't anybody who likes QuickBooks, but it's a $9 billion company that nobody likes.
I use it. Yeah.
But it works. And
It works.
does the job. And that
Simple.
and by the way, they can do your payroll, they can do your insurance, but they don't tell you any of that stuff until you're actually in the door. They know how it works, and they know how to actually almost look at what are the struggling moments you have now, and I'm going to sell you what you need now, as opposed to try to sell you 10 times more than you need at a discounted price.
Nice. Last thought I had was you said something in the past about how people used to apply jobs to be done theory to product, right?
Yeah.
And you said something that was insightful, that products don't have jobs that need to be done. It's
Right.
it's
Products
the
don't have
users,
jobs. People have
consumers.
jobs. Only people
People
have
have
jobs. Products do jobs, right?
And that's what you hire.
And that's
Good.
and that's what you hire. So
All right, Bob, how can we find you and find
best
anything
place
else?
is
that you're-
LinkedIn. I've
Mhm.
got a couple of books. One is called Demand Side Sales, which helps the sales organization understand jobs to be done. I've got another one called Learning to Build, which is about some of the methods and tools that I use to build stuff. And then I have a new book coming out called Job Moves, which is about basically managing talent and understanding kind of like what causes you to say today's the day I'm going to leave this company and go to that company. Or if I'm running a team, how do I make sure that the team is focused on what I need, the progress they're trying to make, as opposed to what I need them just to do. And so it's helping basically on the career path thing, because like I asked all these founders what their biggest, like top 3 problems, and talent is always been one of the top 3 problems. So that's why I wrote that book. So all of it's on LinkedIn. Come find me on LinkedIn. There's a website with the.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Yeah. What?
How do you pronounce your last name?
Mesta. No O.
Moesta.
Yep. Thank you.
The O is silent. Awesome. Well, this
But
has been
but
fantastic.
it's all about basically helping others. Like I'm to the point where it's like I've built a lot of things, but now it's about passing it on. And so anything I can do to help pass it on. Any questions, please just direct them to LinkedIn and I'll figure it out.
Awesome.
Guys,
Thank you very
this
much,
is what
Bob.
happens when you qualify for IHOP. You're 55 and over. We get to the point where like, time to pass it on. I can now
That's
go
right.
get IHOP and achieve it.
Exactly.
All right, gentlemen. Enjoy your
Thank
night.
you,
Go
guys.
get some
Thank you, Bob.
IHOP.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Alrighty.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.